December 16, 1944. The snow fell thick over the Ardennes forest, blanketing the earth in a silence that felt almost sacred. But George S. Patton Jr. knew better than to trust silence in war. Standing in his command tent in Luxembourg, maps spread across a wooden table scarred by countless strategic sessions, he traced his finger along the Belgian border. His Third Army had been pushing east, relentless, unstoppable. Every man under his command knew the general's reputation: aggressive, brilliant, profane, and utterly fearless. The radio crackled to life. Static. Then a voice, urgent and breathless. Major Hansen from Bradley's headquarters. Patton didn't need to hear the full report to know something catastrophic had happened. The Germans had launched a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes. Over 200,000 men. Panzers rolling through the fog. American lines shattered. The 101st Airborne surrounded at Bastogne. Patton listened, his jaw set, eyes cold as the winter outside. Around him, his staff officers exchanged worried glances. This wasn't just an attack. It was Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied forces, reach Antwerp, and turn the tide of the war. The Führer had bet everything on this offensive. And right now, it was working. Supreme Commander Eisenhower called an emergency meeting at Verdun. Patton drove through the frozen night, his jeep bouncing over icy roads. When he arrived, the room was thick with tension. Bradley looked exhausted. Montgomery wore his usual expression of calculated concern. Eisenhower stood at the head of the table, the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders. "The situation is desperate," Eisenhower said. "We need to relieve Bastogne. We need to stop this breakthrough before it becomes a rout." Around the table, generals discussed timelines. A week. Maybe 10 days to reorganize, resupply, and mount a counterattack. The logistics alone seemed impossible. 3 armies would need to disengage from their current positions, pivot 90 degrees north, and attack through one of the worst winters Europe had seen in decades. Patton spoke up. His voice cut through the room like a blade. "When do you want me to attack?" The room fell silent. Eisenhower looked at him, almost amused despite the gravity. "When can you be ready, George?" Patton didn't hesitate. 48 hours. Laughter. Not mocking, but disbelief. Someone muttered that it was impossible. You couldn't move 3 divisions, more than 100,000 men, across that distance in 48 hours. Not in winter. Not while engaged with the enemy. The supply lines alone would be a nightmare. But Patton wasn't joking. He had already run the calculations in his mind during the drive over. He had anticipated this moment, prepared contingency plans that his staff thought were exercises in paranoia. Third Army would disengage from the Saar, wheel north, and smash into the southern flank of the German offensive. His 4th Armored Division would lead the spearhead to Bastogne. Eisenhower studied him. The Supreme Commander knew Patton's reputation for bravado, but also for delivering results when it mattered most. If anyone could pull off the impossible, it was this man. "All right, George. You have your orders. Relieve Bastogne. Stop the German advance." Patton saluted and walked out. Behind him, officers scrambled to understand what they had just witnessed. Montgomery called it reckless. Bradley worried about the risks. But Eisenhower had made his choice. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Patton climbed back into his jeep, his mind already racing through the execution. 3 divisions. 90-degree turn. 48 hours. His staff would think he was insane. His men would grumble about the cold, the speed, the impossibility of it all. But they would do it. Because they were Third Army. Because George Patton demanded nothing less than the impossible. What he didn't know yet was that 9 Nazi commanders in the Ardennes had already received intelligence about Third Army's potential redeployment. They dismissed it as Allied propaganda. No force could move that fast, they assured each other over schnapps and cigarettes in their fortified command posts. They were wrong. And far to the east, in the Kremlin, Joseph Stalin sat in his study reading intelligence reports from the Western Front. The Americans had their celebrated General Patton, the one who moved like lightning, who terrified German soldiers with his reputation alone. Stalin's eyes narrowed as he read. This man was dangerous. Not just to the Nazis. After the war, when the dust settled and new lines were drawn, a man like Patton could become a problem. A very serious problem. But that was a concern for later. For now, the Battle of the Bulge was about to witness something unprecedented in military history. And George Patton was about to prove that the impossible was just another word for Tuesday. Patton returned to his headquarters and summoned his command staff. Colonel Koch, his intelligence officer, arrived first, followed by General Maddox and the division commanders. They filed into the war room expecting a routine briefing. What they got instead was chaos wrapped in military precision. "We move in 48 hours, Patton announced, pointing at the map. Third Army pivots north. We hit the German southern flank and punch through to Bastogne." The room erupted. Not with enthusiasm, but with technical objections. "Sir, the roads are frozen solid. Half our supply trucks are still bringing up ammunition from the Saar. The 4th Armored needs maintenance. The infantry divisions are exhausted from 3 weeks of continuous combat." Patton let them speak. Then he silenced them with a look that had set shivers down the spines of German commanders across France. "I don't care about your problems. I care about solutions. The 101st is surrounded. American soldiers are dying in Bastogne right now while we stand here making excuses. We move in 48 hours. Figure it out." The staff dispersed, stunned and terrified in equal measure. What Patton was demanding violated every principle of military logistics. You couldn't disengage from active combat positions, reorganize an entire army group, move them over 100 miles through winter conditions, and launch a coordinated attack in 2 days. The math didn't work. The physics didn't work. But Patton had already accounted for the impossible. Months earlier, he had ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans for rapid redeployment north. They thought it was paranoid speculation. Now those plans became gospel. Every supply officer, every tank commander, every infantry company received orders that seemed to come from a mind that could see the future. The 4th Armored Division began moving at midnight. Tanks rolled through the darkness, their crews shivering in the brutal cold. Behind them came trucks loaded with ammunition, fuel, medical supplies. The entire Third Army became a living organism, shifting its massive weight northward while still maintaining defensive positions in the Saar. Meanwhile, in the Ardennes, the situation deteriorated by the hour. German panzers pushed deeper into American lines. Entire regiments surrendered or scattered into the forests. The 101st Airborne at Bastogne was completely encircled, outnumbered 5-1, running low on ammunition and medical supplies. General McAuliffe received the German surrender demand and responded with a single word that would become legendary: nuts. But bravado wouldn't hold Bastogne forever. The perimeter was shrinking. Every house, every crossroad became a battlefield. Paratroopers fought from cellars and church towers, making the Germans pay for every yard. Yet everyone knew time was running out. Where was Patton? Where was the relief force? The 9 Nazi commanders coordinating the offensive gathered for a situation briefing. SS Oberfuhrer Schneider lit a cigarette and studied the map. Bastogne would fall within 3 days. Patton's Third Army was still engaged near the Saar, over 100 miles away. Intelligence confirmed it. There was no threat from the south. Not yet. Not in time to matter. They had no idea that at that very moment, thousands of American vehicles were already streaming north through the snow. And George Patton was about to make military history. December 22, 1944. 72 hours after Eisenhower's meeting at Verdun. The snow had turned to freezing rain, making every road a skating rink of ice and mud. But Third Army was already in position. Not in a week. Not in 10 days. In exactly the time Patton had promised. The 4th Armored Division sat at the edge of the German salient, tanks idling, crews ready. Behind them stretched a column of forces so massive it seemed to materialize out of thin air. Over 133,000 men. Hundreds of tanks. Thousands of vehicles. They had driven through the night, through blizzards, through conditions that should have made movement impossible. And now they were here. Patton stood in his command post, studying reports. His meteorologist delivered the latest forecast. Clearing skies within 24 hours. That meant air support. That meant the 101st might actually survive. He picked up the radio transmitter and spoke directly to his division commanders. The order was simple, brutal, and perfectly Patton. Attack. 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 At dawn on December 22, American artillery opened up along a 15-mile front. The barrage was apocalyptic. German positions that had felt secure suddenly found themselves under the most intense bombardment they had experienced since Normandy. Panzers scrambled to defensive positions. Infantry dove into frozen foxholes. Then came the tanks. The 4th Armored Division punched into the German lines like a fist through wet paper. The Nazis had expected a cautious, methodical counterattack. What they got was vintage Patton, speed, aggression, and relentless forward momentum. Within hours, American forces had penetrated 5 miles into German-held territory. In the Ardennes command bunker, the 9 Nazi commanders received the reports with growing horror. Third Army wasn't supposed to be here. Intelligence had confirmed they were engaged near the Saar. Yet here they were, attacking with a force and coordination that seemed impossible. SS Oberfuhrer Schneider crushed his cigarette and demanded explanations. How did an entire army move this fast? How did they reorganize in 48 hours? No one had answers. Only fear. If you're watching this and thinking about how one man's determination changed the course of history, take a second and subscribe to the channel. Because what's about to happen next is the kind of military miracle that proves sometimes the impossible is just waiting for the right person to attempt it. The breakthrough is coming. The German defensive line began to crack. Not collapse, not yet, but crack. American tanks pushed forward, infantry following, engineers clearing obstacles under fire. Every mile gained was another mile closer to Bastogne. Another hour of survival for the 101st Airborne. And George Patton, standing in his command post with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, allowed himself the smallest smile. Third Army was doing exactly what he knew they could do. They were making the impossible look routine. But the real test was still ahead. Bastogne remained surrounded. The weather was still brutal. And 9 Nazi commanders were about to make a decision that would haunt them forever. December 26, 1944. The skies cleared. For the first time in a week, sunlight broke through the clouds, and with it came the roar of Allied aircraft. P-47 Thunderbolts screamed overhead, strafing German positions. B-17 bombers dropped supplies to the besieged 101st Airborne. The tide was turning. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commanded the lead element of the 4th Armored Division. His Sherman tanks had been fighting non-stop for 4 days, pushing through minefields, artillery barrages, and desperate German counterattacks. Every village was a fortress. Every crossroad a killing ground. But Abrams kept moving forward because that's what Patton demanded. Forward. Always forward. At 16:45 hours, Abrams' tanks broke through the final German defensive line. Ahead, through the smoke and snow, he could see the town of Bastogne. The radio crackled with voices from the 101st. They were still there. Still fighting. Still alive. Abrams pushed his tanks faster. Behind him, infantry mounted on half-tracks followed. They smashed through scattered German resistance, and at 1650 hours, the first Sherman rolled into Bastion's perimeter. The siege was broken. Paratroopers emerged from cellars and ruins, gaunt, exhausted, but undefeated. They had held for 7 days against impossible odds. And Patton had delivered on his promise. He had moved Third Army 90 degrees, attacked in 48 hours, and relieved Bastogne in less than a week. The news reached German high command like a thunderbolt. The 9 Nazi commanders who had orchestrated the Ardennes offensive realized their gamble had failed. The southern flank was collapsing. American forces were pouring through the breach. Supply lines were threatened. Entire divisions risked encirclement. SS Oberfuhrer Schneider sat in the command bunker, ash from his cigarette falling onto the map. The others argued about defensive positions, about reorganizing, about making a stand. But Schneider saw the truth in their eyes. They were terrified. Not of dying. Of being captured by Patton's army. Stories had spread among Wehrmacht soldiers. Patton showed no mercy to SS units. His tanks didn't stop. His men fought with a ferocity that seemed almost personal. The general himself was a demon on the battlefield, pushing his forces harder and faster than any commander in the war. That night, under cover of darkness, the 9 commanders made their choice. They issued orders for a general withdrawal. Not a tactical retreat. A flight. Entire divisions began pulling back toward the German border, abandoning positions, leaving equipment, sometimes leaving wounded soldiers behind. The Great Offensive, Hitler's master plan to split the Allies, crumbled in less than 2 weeks. Patton received the intelligence reports with grim satisfaction. The Germans were running. Third Army pursued them relentlessly, turning retreat into rout. Every day brought new gains. Every night brought captured territory and demoralized prisoners. But far away in Moscow, Stalin read the reports with different emotions. This American general had done in days what Soviet commanders took months to achieve. He moved with German speed. He attacked with Soviet ruthlessness. After the war, this man would be a problem. A dangerous problem. January 1945. The Battle of the Bulge was over. What Hitler had envisioned as his grand reversal of fortune had become Germany's catastrophic bleeding wound. Over 100,000 German casualties. Tanks destroyed. Divisions shattered. The Wehrmacht would never recover from the losses sustained in the Ardennes. Patton's Third Army didn't stop at Bastogne. They pushed east, liberating towns, crossing into Germany itself. Every day brought fresh evidence of the Nazi collapse. Prisoners flooded into Allied camps by the thousands. Many specifically asked to surrender to American forces rather than wait for the Soviets advancing from the east. The 9 commanders who had fled the Ardennes faced different fates. 3 were killed in the subsequent fighting as Allied forces pushed into Germany. 2 were captured by British forces and spent years in prisoner-of-war camps. 4 made it back across the Rhine, only to face Hitler's fury. The Führer raged about betrayal, about cowardice, about generals who lacked the will to win. 2 were stripped of command and sent to defend Berlin in its final hopeless days. The other 2 disappeared into the chaos of Germany's collapse, their names erased from official records. But one thing united all their testimonies after the war. They had underestimated George Patton. They had believed the intelligence reports that said no army could move that fast, reorganize that efficiently, attack with that kind of precision. They had bet everything on the impossibility of what Patton accomplished. And they had lost. Eisenhower visited Third Army headquarters in late January. He found Patton studying maps of the drive toward Berlin. The Supreme Commander knew what his most aggressive general was thinking. But the political decisions had already been made. The Soviets would take Berlin. The Americans would stop at the Elbe River. Patton argued. Not publicly, but in private conversations that grew heated. "We could be in Berlin in 10 days, he told Eisenhower. "We could end this war on our terms. Instead, we're handing half of Europe to Stalin." Eisenhower understood the military logic. But he also understood the political reality. The alliance with the Soviet Union was fragile. Roosevelt and Churchill had made promises. The boundaries were drawn. Third Army would not race to Berlin. Patton accepted the orders, but his frustration was palpable. He had studied the Soviets, understood their ambitions. After the war, he warned anyone who would listen that the next conflict wouldn't be with Germany. It would be with the Russians. Those warnings made their way to Moscow. Soviet intelligence officers compiled reports on the American general who spoke openly about confronting the Red Army. Stalin read them with cold calculation. This man was a threat. Not now, not during the alliance. But after. When Germany was defeated and new lines were drawn across Europe. Patton had made powerful enemies by being too good at his job. By moving too fast. By winning too decisively. And in the shadowy world of post-war politics, that made him dangerous to more than just the Nazis he had defeated. December 9, 1945. 9 months after Germany's surrender. George S. Patton Jr. lay in a hospital bed in Heidelberg, his neck broken, his body paralyzed from a car accident that should have been minor. A truck had collided with his vehicle on a routine hunting trip. The details were strange. The timing was stranger. He couldn't move, but his mind remained sharp as ever. Visitors came and went. Old soldiers. Fellow commanders. His wife Beatrice, who held his hand and pretended not to cry. They all knew what the doctors wouldn't say out loud. He wasn't going to recover. In those final days, Patton reflected on everything. The dash across France. The relief of Bastogne. The victories that had seemed impossible until he made them real. He had pushed men beyond their limits because he knew they were capable of more than they believed. He had moved armies like chess pieces because he saw the board 3 moves ahead of everyone else. But he also thought about the warnings he had given. About the Soviets. About the new threat rising in the East. Few had listened. Fewer had acted. The alliance that won the war was already fracturing, and Patton had seen it coming before anyone else. Soviet intelligence officers in Moscow received the news of his accident with professional interest. They filed reports. Made notations. Whether the crash was truly an accident or something more calculated would remain one of history's persistent questions. What was certain was that Stalin had identified Patton as a threat, and now that threat was neutralized. George S. Patton died on December 21, 1945. Exactly 1 year and 5 days after he had launched the counterattack that saved Bastogne. He was buried in Luxembourg, among the soldiers of Third Army who had fallen in battle. Thousands attended the funeral. Generals saluted. Flags flew at half-mast across Europe. The man who had terrified 9 Nazi commanders into flight, who had accomplished the impossible in 48 hours, who had changed the course of the war with sheer force of will, was gone. But his legacy remained etched into history. Third Army's relief of Bastogne became a case study taught at military academies around the world. The 90-degree pivot, the rapid redeployment, the coordinated attack, all of it defied conventional military wisdom. Yet Patton had done it because he refused to accept that impossible meant unachievable. Years later, historians would debate whether his death was truly an accident. Soviet defectors would hint at darker possibilities. Intelligence files would remain classified for decades. But the truth, whether accidental or orchestrated, was that George Patton had made enemies on both sides of the Iron Curtain simply by being too effective, too outspoken, too dangerous to the New World Order taking shape. If you made it this far, thank you for watching this incredible true story. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what you think about Patton's legacy, and subscribe for more untold stories from history. What topic should we cover next? Let us know below. Until next time, remember that sometimes the impossible is just another mission waiting for the right person to accept it.